For years, he stood in the shadows while millions worshipped. He never complained, never defended himself, never spoke up when the rumors started spreading like wildfire across social media. But what happens when silence becomes too heavy to carry? Today, you're going to hear the truth from a man who finally broke his silence, not because he wanted attention, but because his story might save someone else's life. This isn't about celebrity drama. This is about something far more dangerous: the slow death of losing yourself while everyone thinks you're fine. Stay with me, because what Pastor Joe Egbu revealed will challenge everything you think you know about strength, marriage, and ministry. And the reason he stayed silent for so long? That's the part that will hit you the hardest. If you've ever been in a church service where they sang Waymaker, you know the power of Sinach's music. Over 1 billion streams. Worship anthems that transcend denominations, cultures, and continents. Her voice has comforted the broken, strengthened the weary, and lifted the faith of worshipers in every corner of the globe. But here's what most people don't know. Behind every world stage performance, behind every award ceremony, behind every international tour, there was a man who chose to stay in the background. Not because he was weak, not because he lacked talent, but because he believed that's what love looked like. Pastor Joe Egbu. To most people, he was just Sinach's husband, the quiet guy in the family photos, the man who smiled politely at events but never grabbed the microphone. He was the steady presence at ministry functions, the calm figure who attended conferences but never took center stage. Even during major events where his wife was being celebrated, honored, and lifted up before thousands, Pastor Joe remained in the background. He rarely gave interviews. His social media presence was minimal. He simply existed in the orbit of one of gospel music's brightest stars. And for years, that seemed to be enough. Here's something critical to understand. And I need you to really hear this, because it applies to so many people watching right now. Society celebrates visible success, but it rarely acknowledges invisible support. Pastor Joe represented millions of people who support powerful partners while losing their own identity, who sacrifice their voice because they think that's what commitment requires, who slowly disappear into the background of someone else's spotlight. And here's the dangerous part. Everyone praised him for it. Relationship goals. They'd comment under their photos. This is what godly marriage looks like. He's so humble, letting her shine. People would see pictures of them together and immediately project their ideals onto this couple. They became a symbol, an icon, a representation of what ministry marriage should look like. But what if that humility was actually slowly killing him from the inside? What if the very thing everyone was praising was the thing that was breaking him down, piece by piece? Think about this for a moment. How many people in your life are praised for their silence? How many people are celebrated for staying in the background, for not making waves, for being low maintenance? We've created a culture where suffering quietly is seen as strength, where fading into the background is considered selfless, where losing yourself is repackaged as sacrifice, and Pastor Joe was the poster child for this toxic pattern. But what started as love and support was about to turn into something he never expected, something that would force him to confront the most difficult question of his life. Who am I when nobody's watching? It started subtly. A few comments here and there under Sinach's social media posts. Where's Pastor Joe? Someone would ask. Why isn't he on tour with her anymore? Another would wonder. I hope everything's okay at home. Others would comment with concerned emojis. At first, these were just scattered observations, easy to dismiss as random curiosity. But then, something shifted. The questions became more frequent, more pointed, more suspicious. The tone changed from curiosity to concern, and then from concern to speculation. Then the whispers got louder. Message boards dedicated to gospel music started threads about Pastor Joe's absence. Gossip sites picked up the story. Speculation ran wild across platforms. Some said he couldn't handle his wife's fame, that his ego was bruised by standing in her shadow. Others suggested he'd left the ministry entirely, that he'd walked away from his calling because the pressure was too much. A few even whispered about marriage trouble, jealousy, emotional distance, irreconcilable differences. There was zero evidence for any of it, just assumptions built on the foundation of absence. But here's the thing about silence in the social media age, and this is absolutely crucial to understand. People will fill silence with their own narrative. When you don't provide information, others will create it for you. When you don't control the story, someone else will write it. The absence of Pastor Joe's voice became a blank canvas, and everyone started painting their own version of his story. Some painted him as a victim of celebrity marriage. Others painted him as insecure and controlling. Some saw him as a man who'd lost his way. Others saw him as someone who'd simply given up. And the tragedy is that none of them knew the truth. None of them understood what was really happening behind the closed doors of that ministry household. This is crucial, and I want you to understand this principle because it applies to your life too. When you don't control your narrative, others will create one for you. Pastor Joe's silence wasn't interpreted as dignity. It was interpreted as guilt, weakness, or confirmation of the rumors. Every day he didn't respond was seen as evidence that something was wrong. Every event he didn't attend was analyzed and dissected. Every photo without him sparked a new wave of theories. The lesson here? Sometimes silence is wisdom. Sometimes it's the right choice to step back and not engage with every accusation, every rumor, every speculation. But sometimes silence is misunderstood, pain that needs a voice. Sometimes what looks like strength is actually suppression. Sometimes what appears to be above the drama is actually drowning beneath it. And for years, Pastor Joe let them talk. But what was really happening behind closed doors? That's where this story gets real. And that's what we need to explore next. Let me paint you a picture of what was actually happening, because the truth is always more complex than the rumors. While Sinach was on world tours, ministering to thousands, recording new albums, and expanding her global influence, Pastor Joe was home. But he wasn't relaxing. He wasn't being lazy. He wasn't enjoying some kind of easy life while his wife worked. He was wrestling with questions that no one thought to ask. Who am I when I'm not standing next to her? This question would wake him up at night. Does my voice matter if millions aren't listening? He'd wonder this while watching her music videos accumulate millions of views. Am I a man of God, or just a supporting character in someone else's story? This thought would haunt him during quiet moments when the house was empty and the noise of ministry had faded away. This is where it gets deep, so stay with me because what I'm about to explain affects more people than you realize. There's a psychological phenomenon called reflected glory, where your identity becomes so intertwined with someone else's success that you forget who you are without it. It's when you start introducing yourself through your relationship to someone else rather than through your own accomplishments. It's when your achievements feel insignificant because they're always compared to something greater. It's when you look in the mirror and see a shadow instead of a person. Pastor Joe wasn't jealous of his wife. Let me be absolutely clear about this, because jealousy is what people assumed, and it couldn't be further from the truth. He was proud of her. He celebrated her success. He believed in her calling. He knew she was anointed for the platform she occupied. But pride doesn't erase the internal crisis that happens when you realize you've stopped pursuing your own dreams, when your accomplishments feel insignificant by comparison, when you're introduced as someone's husband before you're seen as yourself. And here's the part that breaks my heart, and it should break yours too. He thought this was normal. He thought this was sacrifice. He thought this was what godly husbands do. He'd been taught, both explicitly and implicitly, that being a good husband meant making yourself smaller so your wife could be bigger. That supporting her meant suppressing yourself. That loving her meant losing yourself. And for a while, he accepted this as the price of partnership. But the human soul wasn't designed to shrink forever. Eventually, something has to give. Let's talk about something the church rarely addresses, and honestly, this might make some people uncomfortable, but it needs to be said. There's crushing pressure on ministry spouses that most people never see. You're expected to be constantly supportive, but never needy. You're supposed to show up to every event with a smile, even when you're exhausted, even when you're struggling, even when you'd rather be anywhere else. You can never express doubt, fatigue, or struggle because that might damage the testimony. You represent relationship goals, even when you're barely holding it together. And here's what makes it even worse. You can't talk about it. You can't post about your struggles, because then you're being negative. You can't share your doubts because then you're weak in faith. You can't express your fatigue because then you're not committed enough. So what do? You perform? Ministry couples face a unique burden, and this is something that people outside of ministry often don't understand. They're not just managing a relationship, they're managing a public example. Every argument feels like it could damage the ministry. Every moment of weakness feels like it could stumble someone's faith. Every season of doubt feels like it could destroy the testimony they've built. So what happens? They put on a mask. They smile for the cameras. They post the perfect pictures while dying inside. They perform unity while experiencing distance. They project strength while feeling weak. And the gap between the public image and the private reality grows wider and wider until one day you wake up and realize you don't even recognize yourself anymore. Pastor Joe was drowning in this performance. Every event he attended required him to be on. Every interaction required him to represent something that he wasn't sure he even believed in anymore. Not the faith itself, but the performance of faith. Not the marriage itself, but the performance of a perfect marriage. And the worst part? Everyone thought he was fine. People would see him at events and think, what a solid guy. What a steady presence. What a humble servant. They had no idea that behind that calm exterior was a man who was slowly losing himself, piece by piece, day by day, smile by smile. But there was one moment, one specific day, when everything changed, and it wasn't what anyone expected. Here's what didn't happen. And this is important because people always expect the dramatic story. Pastor Joe didn't have a public meltdown. He didn't blast his struggles on social media. He didn't start a war with his critics. He didn't file for divorce or abandon his faith. He didn't do any of the things that people expected or that would make for good gossip. What he did was far more courageous, far more difficult, and far more rare. He admitted to himself, in a moment of complete honesty, 4 simple words: I'm not okay. 4 words that could have saved countless marriages if spoken sooner. 4 words that could have prevented countless breakdowns if acknowledged earlier. 4 words that could have stopped countless silent sufferings if valued properly. But in ministry culture, in performance culture, in the culture of constant strength and unwavering faith, those 4 words feel like failure. They feel like weakness. They feel like you're letting everyone down. This is critical, and I cannot stress this enough. You cannot fix what you won't acknowledge. You cannot heal what you won't name. You cannot overcome what you refuse to see. Pastor Joe realized that his silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was slowly destroying him. The facade of having it all together was costing him his mental health, his sense of purpose, his very identity. The performance was eating him alive from the inside out, and he had a choice to make. He could continue the performance until something inside him broke completely, or he could choose honesty and deal with whatever consequences came from that truth. So, he made a choice. Not to leave, not to quit, not to abandon everything he'd built, but to heal, to step back, to find himself again. And what he did next? It's the part of this story that's changing lives right now. It happened at a men's retreat in Lagos. Nothing fancy, nothing planned for public consumption. No cameras, no live streams, no press releases. Just pastors, husbands, and leaders gathering to be honest with each other in a space where they didn't have to perform. These retreats are rare and precious because they're one of the few places where ministry leaders can take off the mask and be human, where they can admit struggle without fear of judgment, where they can express doubt without losing their platform. Pastor Joe was invited, not as a celebrity spouse, not as Sinach's husband, not as someone with a famous last name, but as a spiritual father, someone who'd walked through fire and might have wisdom to share, someone who'd endured and might have insights for others who were enduring. When his turn came to speak, something shifted. You could feel it in the room. The atmosphere changed. He didn't give a polished sermon with 3 points and a poem. He didn't share a carefully crafted message designed to inspire without challenging. He gave raw testimony. He stood before those men and let his guard down completely. He said, "I never stopped loving my wife, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to love myself." The room went still. I disappeared into being her support system until I couldn't recognize the man in the mirror. Men started leaning forward. The silence wasn't avoidance. It was survival. I needed space to find my own voice again. Some men began to weep. He continued, "For years, I thought being a good husband meant making myself invisible. I thought supporting her meant suppressing me. I thought love meant losing myself, and I was wrong." The power of breaking silence in safe spaces cannot be overstated. When Pastor Joe spoke those words, he wasn't just telling his story. He was giving permission for every man in that room to tell theirs. He was naming the struggle they'd been hiding. He was voicing the questions they'd been afraid to ask. He was expressing the pain they'd been taught to suppress. And something broke open, not just in him, but in them. One by one, men started sharing their own stories. The pastor, who felt inadequate because his wife earned more money. The worship leader who struggled with his identity because his wife was the senior pastor. The businessman who felt invisible because his wife's ministry had global reach. The teacher who questioned his worth because his wife's influence dwarfed his own. These were strong men, godly men, committed men. But they were also hurting men, lost men, men who'd been taught that admitting struggle was weakness and that seeking help was failure. Someone in the room, moved by the moment, pulled out their phone and recorded a snippet of Pastor Joe's testimony. They posted it online with a simple caption, "This is what real ministry looks like." And within hours, it went viral, not because it was shocking, not because it was scandalous, but because it was true. Because it named something that millions of people were feeling but couldn't articulate. Because it gave language to pain that had been silent for too long. Here's what's powerful, and this might surprise you. The internet didn't attack him. They thanked him. Thousands of messages poured in from every corner of the globe. Husbands who'd lost themselves supporting strong wives sent messages saying, "I thought I was the only one." Pastors experiencing burnout wrote, "You just saved my ministry." Ministry leaders wrestling with identity shared, "I've been dying in silence, and you gave me permission to speak." Spouses who didn't know their partners were silently suffering reached out saying, "Now I understand what my husband has been going through." The response was overwhelming, not with criticism, but with gratitude, not with judgment, but with relief, not with condemnation, but with connection. This is crucial, and it's a lesson that applies far beyond this story. When you share your truth with grace and authenticity, people don't condemn you. They see themselves in you. Vulnerability creates connection, not judgment. Honesty builds bridges, not walls. Pastor Joe's honesty did something revolutionary in ministry culture. It normalized the struggle. It gave language to pain that people couldn't articulate. It created a permission structure for others to seek help. It shattered the illusion that ministry leaders have to be perfect. And here's the beautiful part, the part that shows you what real love looks like. Sinach never weaponized his vulnerability. She didn't use his moment of honesty against him. She didn't make him feel weak for admitting struggle. She didn't punish him for breaking the perfect image. Instead, she supported his healing. She adjusted her ministry schedule to prioritize their relationship. She created space for him to find himself again. She chose their private health over their public image. That's real love, not the performance of love on social media, not the appearance of love at events, but the choice to prioritize healing over image, truth over performance, and wholeness over reputation. Now let me tell you what actual restoration looks like, because it's not a dramatic movie montage where everything gets better in 3 minutes with emotional music playing in the background. Real restoration is messy. It's slow. It's uncomfortable. It requires facing truths you've been avoiding. It demands conversations you don't want to have. It means acknowledging pain you've been suppressing. Pastor Joe and Sinach went to counseling, and yes, ministry leaders need therapy. They had difficult conversations about expectations and identity, conversations that made both of them uncomfortable. They created boundaries around ministry commitments, which meant saying no to opportunities that once seemed impossible to refuse. They started hosting intimate gatherings for ministry couples where they shared their real struggles, not their highlight reel. They stopped performing and started being honest. They stopped projecting and started healing. But the story doesn't end with his personal healing. What Pastor Joe did with his pain, how he transformed his struggle into service, that's the legacy that matters. He didn't go public to clear his name or defend his reputation. He went public to open a door for others who were suffering in silence. And his message to the church was both gentle and revolutionary. He said, "We need to stop performing perfect marriages and start building real ones." Think about the implications of that statement. How many marriages are dying behind the facade of social media perfection? How many couples are performing unity while experiencing distance? How many ministry marriages are one argument away from collapse because they've never learned to be honest? Pastor Joe challenged the church's obsession with picture-perfect couples, with Instagram-worthy relationships, with leaders who never admit struggle, with the toxic belief that needing help equals spiritual failure. He said, and these words should be written on the wall of every church. Our ministry on stage means nothing if our marriages can't survive behind closed doors. Think about that. How many ministry couples are dying inside while their social media looks flawless? How many pastors are one breakdown away from walking away because they can't admit they're struggling? How many worship leaders are leading others into God's presence while they themselves feel distant and disconnected? The performance culture in ministry is killing people, and Pastor Joe had the courage to say it out loud. He specifically addressed supporting spouses, particularly men married to powerful women. This is revolutionary in cultures where men are taught to never show weakness, to always be the provider and protector, to suppress emotions, to equate vulnerability with failure. Pastor Joe said, "True strength isn't suffering in silence. True strength is having the courage to say, 'I need help.'" This statement alone has the power to save marriages, prevent breakdowns, and transform how we think about masculinity in ministry. Supporting someone doesn't mean disappearing. You can champion someone's success without sacrificing your identity. You can celebrate someone's gifts without diminishing your own. You can be a supporting spouse without becoming invisible. Then Pastor Joe got practical, and this is gold for anyone in a relationship, ministry or otherwise. First, communication isn't optional. Silent suffering helps no one. You have to create space for honest conversation, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't have the words. Second, your identity can't be borrowed. You need purpose beyond your relationship. Your spouse's calling doesn't replace your own. God called you both individually before He joined you together. Third, boundaries protect, they don't reject. Saying, "I need space to heal," isn't abandonment. It's wisdom. Taking time for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Fourth, counseling isn't failure. Getting help is strength. Waiting until you're destroyed is the real failure. And fifth, private health determines public impact. What happens at home determines what lasts on stage. Protect the private, prioritize the unseen, value the hidden. Pastor Joe Egbu is no longer just known as Sinach's husband. He's a man who walked through a valley of identity loss and came back with a message that's saving marriages, preventing burnouts, and giving permission for honesty. His legacy isn't silent support. It's courageous truth-telling. He now conducts workshops on spiritual restoration, marriage, and identity. He speaks at conferences about the hidden struggles of ministry spouses. He mentors men who are losing themselves in the shadows of powerful partners. He and Sinach continue to minister together, but now with a message that's more powerful than any song, the message that real love chooses healing over image, that real ministry starts at home, and that real strength admits weakness. So, the next time you see a perfect couple on social media, remember this story. Remember that you're seeing the highlight reel, not the whole story. And if they're truly healthy, it's because they've had conversations you're not seeing, done work you don't know about, and chosen honesty over image. That's the real relationship goal. Not the perfect photos, not the inspiring captions, not the appearance of having it all together, but the commitment to be honest, to seek help, to prioritize healing, and to value the unseen work that makes love last. Pastor Joe's story isn't just about one couple. It's about all of us learning to live authentically, love deeply, and have the courage to heal. It's about breaking the performance culture that's killing marriages. It's about giving permission for honesty in a world that demands perfection. It's about remembering that being silent doesn't mean being absent, and sometimes the most healing words don't come from a microphone, but from hearts that are finally ready to be heard.